So here's our meetup. We've got a few people gathered. Yeah, everyone wave to Mika. Okay, so I did just kind of a brief introduction of WordPress Multisite, and I gave them a quick intro to you, but if you want, you can start with introducing yourself, and then you can either jump straight into questions or you just kind of go down your list of do's and don'ts.
Oh, I have a lot of do's and don'ts. So my name is Mika Epstein. It's very weird hearing that echo. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to turn that off.
All good? Okay. So my name is Mika Epstein. I work for Dreamhost in a variety of roles. Currently, I'm working on the hosting team, getting WordPress and Dreamhost and DreamPress, which is our managed WordPress offering, all happy and working together. But part of how I got here was that I got really, really good at WordPress Multisite for reasons unknown to, well, really anyone. It just sort of happened. And I like WordPress Multisite a great deal. I get to contribute to it all the time. I wrote a couple of ebooks on it, WordPress Multisite 101 and WordPress Multisite 110, and I use it every day. It runs my main site, or my main suite of sites. I've got 10, I think, right now set up on a multi-site, including a store. They used to run Trunk, and now they're actually just running the current version of WordPress because of the store. It's a little bit dangerous to want to run Trunk when you're touching people's money, I thought. And because I use multi-site and I understand how it's supposed to be used in WordPress, I see it from a very different perspective than a lot of other people do. I get how WordPress intended for it to be used originally. Hello, everyone. I can see you. I get what it does and why it does things in ways that we sort of look at and go, well, that was stupid. And I understand the fundamental goals of where it needs to be everything to everyone, and that it's just not quite there yet. So, I think you guys asked me to do this the day before yesterday, so I didn't get as much prep work as I normally do before I do some sort of presentation. So how do you guys use multi-site right now? Or do any of you use multi-site?
Yeah, so a few. So I use it for a school district. So we've got 23 sites in it. Someone who just left had, what did he say, 5 or so sites in his? Yeah, 5 or so sites in his, and then who else was using?
I've got a handful of just little internal sites.
Some internal sites.
We use it to manage entire groups of industry sites, such as funeral homes, and that's managed with our plugins that manage obituaries and that sort of thing.
Mika, did you hear that, or should I repeat it?
I heard that.
Okay.
We've used it to manage event registration sites.
Okay.
So you guys, what are the main difficulties you guys experience when you're using WordPress multi-site? I mean, what's the one thing that drives you up a wall every time you have to do it?
Not having core domain mapping.
Core domain mapping. That's something that's actually working on. The development path for it is complicated by 2 things. The biggest one being cookies. The second one being cross-site scripting, which comes into play in a very odd way when you consider the fact that you're going to be logging into WordPress example.com through domain.com, and browsers kind of get a little bit concerned when you start doing things like that. There are ways around it. There are ways to solve this problem, but many levels get complicated when you start looking at, well, what if I want a secure backend? Like I'm running HTTPS on the back end of all of my sites right now. So when I was using domain mapping and trying to share the cookie so I could have a single sign-on, which would be, you know, icing on a cake, right? It just didn't work at all because it would log me into one site that was SSL and one that wasn't, and it would say, wait a minute, I don't know who you're supposed to be. You may have noticed with WordPress 4.1 also, it got really picky with how you had your home and site URL set up. This hit people who were using single site more than multi-site because they'd have www.domain.com and then the non-www version, and they could log into one but not the other. And that's because WordPress is starting to get pickier that your cookie matches your domain. So the biggest issue we're going to have with domain mapping is really going to be just that, the fact that we don't really have a great way to allow you to be logged into multiple domains through one domain. WordPress.com has a few fixes for it, but none of them right now are things that are easily translatable back into WordPress core. Now, you don't have to use a plugin to map a domain, but I do find that it makes life a heck of a lot easier to do it. There are 3 really good plugins for it. One of them is called Mercator, and you may not have heard this because it's not on the WordPress repository. Mercator is made by Ryan McHugh. He's also one of the geniuses behind the JSON API, if you've heard about that, which is the next big thing for WordPress. And it does things in a very different way than the traditional WordPress multi-site domain mapping plugin by, Donacha and Ron Rennick. The Rennicks are my buddies. It's their fault I do multi-site. The way that the traditional plugin works, the one that everybody knows, is that you go in and you add your domain and you tell it what site you're going to point it at. And for the most part, that's it. You can let users map domains to their own sites if they want to. You don't have to. The way that the Mercator plugin works is that it adds a new tab onto your edit domain field. So when you go into network admin sites and you hover over the site and you click edit, you've got those tabs there. And this adds a new one that'll let you handle domain mapping. Insofar as it goes, it's awesome. You may have some problems if you're running SSL certificates right now. They know about it. They're working on it. But that's what I would call a more advanced plugin. Now, that said, it does handle single sign-on a heck of a lot better than you're going to have with the traditional plugin, unless you let it use, and I'm sure you've seen the setting if you've used the plugin. It says, do you want to use the main domain for your site? So what they mean is, do I want to have everybody else look at example.com, but when I log in, I'm going to see example.domain.com. When you do that, when you keep the domain on your own, well, when you keep the login on the master domain, you've got single sign-on. When you don't is when you start having these problems of, I want to be logged into 4 different domains. It's not a fun day to do that in any way, and it is getting a lot better. We've already got a lot of steps forward to make it work. You may not even notice that in the last 3 releases of WordPress, there have all the little incremental fixes to making that specific issue better, and it is on our roadmap for things that we want to see multi-site do perfectly in the future. It's just going to take us a little while to get there, a little longer than we'd hoped. How many of you have struggled trying to add users to specific sites? Like you get a new user, you want to add them to the site.
Yeah, we're getting some yeses.
Okay. So there are plugins that can do things like adding a user to all sites on the network. Multi-site user management is the main plugin that people use, and it's great because you can say every new user should be a subscriber on this site, they should be an editor on this site, and they should have no role on this other site. And that's great until you get to the point where you say, well, I want to add Joe as an admin to all sites on my network. We're trying to come up with ideas for ways around that, and one of them that we came up with was, you've got the idea of a network admin. A network admin can do everything to every site, whether or not they're a member. What if you had sort of a sidekick admin to that? Sidekick, because we used to call them super admins, so superhero has a sidekick. And the sidekick admin would be able to go to all of the sites and do similar but not the same things. Like maybe they couldn't install a plugin, but they'd still have access to administer all the sites. When you start looking at adding one person to all the domains, or all the sites on your network, it gets complex because it's not meant to do that. It's really meant to be multiple separate sites with almost a siloed section of your user base added to one site and then the other and then the other. And it's not really intended to be how most of us are using it, which is the same few people on multiple sites running sometimes similar but different sites, but also sometimes we're going to be running the same idea of a site, like a store in location A or location B, or a school. You've got, one department and another department, and maybe a couple of people have crossovers. And multi-site starts to break down in that moment, and you think, well, the easiest thing to do is add them as a network admin, and don't do that. Network admin is a very dangerous role. There's a reason that only the network admin can install plugins. For example, a badly formed plugin can take down your whole network. You really don't want anybody but the network admin to be able to raise their hand and go, I'm going to press that button and break things. It's the same issue. Some of you may have run into a case where you try to embed an iframe in a post, and it works great for you, the network admin, but your site admins or your editors all say, well, none of this works, and it works on a single WordPress. That's what's called KSES protection, and it's done on purpose because a badly formed JavaScript or a badly formed PHP code that you've embedded into a page can actually take down your database. And if it's just one site, that's one thing, but we're talking about the whole database for all your sites, and that can get really bad really fast. So we start not trusting users as much, which sort of comes to the biggest problem that we've got with multi-site today. How do we know what kind of a network we have? If you have a network where you trust everyone to be good, and you know that they're going to be grown-ups and mature and they can do whatever they want, and you want to trust them, shouldn't you be able to do that easily without having a bunch of multi-sites? At the last WordPress Community Summit, we started coming up with a concept of trusted and untrusted sites, which I still argue are the worst descriptions we could possibly have come up with for those things, because on a trusted site, things are locked down. On an untrusted site, they're open. And in that moment, I looked at everybody else in the meeting and I said, what are we saying in the first place? So we're trying to come up with different ideas of how people want to use WordPress, because the way that it was intended to be used is this: multiple separate sites run by separate people with siloed content. And that's it. I mean, if you look at WordPress.com, that is essentially what it was meant to be used for. You're not going to share content, you're not going to share data, you're not going to share images. You have the same collective user base, the same collective theme and plugin base, but that's it. And it's mostly for ease of, I only have to upgrade the plugins once, I only have to upgrade the theme once, I only have to edit a user once and add them to multiple sites, which is great. But that's not how we end up using it, is it? I mean, how many of us actually just use it that way for multiple sites that really don't talk to each other? Do any of you?
Anyone?
We have a client that put on a multi-site just because they like that idea of a single sign-on. And like, once you're in, you're in. Now they actually want to revert the multi-site. And we're in talks of that. So that's kind of interesting. I think they can, kind of like what we're saying is they thought it was going to be as easy as like a single sign-on and it would be very clear, but I don't think it's clear to them. Like the staff is having a hard time understanding what a network admin versus a local person, the different roles involved.
So I heard most of that. Some of it started to cut out. Chet, could you maybe recap it for me?
Yeah, so they had a client who was interested in multi-site for reasons like single sign-on, and now that they're kind of understanding that there are more complexities than they maybe thought they were getting into, they would like to revert and go back to individual single sites. So they're looking into that as an option right now.
So when I gave a talk at WordCamp San Francisco 2 years ago about don't use WordPress multi-site. That was actually the title, and I had a couple people before I gave the talk going, but I thought you loved multi-site. And it was a tongue-in-cheek title, but anything you want to do with multi-site, you can do on a single WordPress install. You can have subdomains pointing to your categories. You can have subdomains pointing to your custom post types. You can isolate a user to just be able to edit a custom post type. So when a company says that they want to have single sign-on, that's a good start for looking at multi-site, but the other reasons that they wanted the single sign-on, why did they want the siloed content? Was it really meant to be siloed content where it's completely separate from each other? Did they just want a subfolder where they wanted to have, you know, all of their records over here and all of their there are videotapes over here. Videotapes. People don't even use those anymore. Find your DVDs and your CDs and have them separated. You could do those as custom post types instead of having them be separate groups. It's actually funny. When people are on the WordPress support forums and they say, I don't know if I should use WordPress multi-site, that's actually something I've stopped answering, because the answer is generally you probably don't want to use it for a client, definitely, unless you've used it yourself extensively, because you're jumping into the deep end of WordPress. It's not very user-friendly, especially compared to the rest of WordPress. And in a way, this is on purpose. We don't want the brand new person who's just started WordPress to dive into this whole world, because you do find out, well, wait, now that I've made 6 different sites and I wanted them to be one, can I merge them? Not easily. You can easily take down multi-site and take it just back to your main site, but the only way to get the content off of it would be to either use a plugin like Backup Buddy, which will let you export it and import it to a single site, which is great, or you have to do the traditional export-import in WordPress, and that can get really messy really fast when you start talking about, what if you already have custom post types on one site that you want to keep? What if you've got a store on this site that you want to keep? And you can do all this directly in the database, and I've done it. I used to say that there was no one who could pay me enough to unravel a multi-site with multiple sites and merge it back into one single site, but my company actually did manage to pay me enough to do it the other year. I have taken down a multi-site manually. I did through all the things first. I tried the plugins that I could try, and I ended up doing the whole thing manually and then merging databases, and it was a nightmare, which is I contradict one of my good friends, Pippin Williamson. He says he likes to use multi-site to do dev work, and I look at him like he's insane, because I would never want to dev out a site on a multi-site network. I would always do it single, using like Desktop Server or Vagrant if you're feeling sassy and advanced, and build the site up to show people and then move it off to where it's going to live, because moving a site off of multi-site is hard. And that's something that's probably not going to get much easier. If you ever had anyone on WordPress.com and they wonder why they end up having to pay I think it's $150 to have the migration from WordPress.com over to a self-hosted WordPress, and why am I paying almost $200 for this service? And the answer is because you were on a multi-site network, and they're going to have to go in and check database settings for you to copy over your theme settings, to the plugin settings that you had, all of your media. They've got access that you, the end user, will not. And that's what you've created on your network. You've got a beautiful network of all your sites, but only you, the network admin, is going to have access to go in via FTP and get the files. Because if you give your users that access, they'll have access to everyone's files. And I'm betting you don't want that. Especially not with clients. They don't want to know who's living on the other servers. At least they haven't in my experience. They tend to get a little bit mad when they find out, wait, we were all on the same box all along? Yes, it's Soylent Green, surprise. So do you guys have like specific questions or specific pain points or even things that you really love about WordPress multi-site or just think is weird that you want to know more about? Because I have a breadth of knowledge, and the best thing I can tell you about using or not using multi-site is that you have to sit down and go, okay, what am I trying to do? Has it been done before? Are there other plugins out there besides adding on a multi-site that'll let me do the same thing without having to put the complexity of multi-site on there? And who's going to be administering this at the end? If you are going to be running the site and you're WordPress savvy and multi-site savvy, go for it. If you're going to be handing this off to your customer, please don't. Just no, they won't know what to do. They will sit there, and while that might be great because you get them on a retainer for next year when they got an upgrade and they're terrified and they want your help, it's not really great for them, and it makes WordPress look bad, and it actually is going to end up putting more work on you in the long run. Unless they've got someone who knows multi-site, it's just not a good idea to hand it over to your clients.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions. Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
I have a question about replicating a multi-site to like a dev or a staging environment. I heard Backup Buddy mentioned, but I look at some Backup Buddy documentation, and they said that it doesn't really work with multi-site properly, or that it's still beta software. So do you have both backup and replicate sites.
Mika, did you catch that?
Sorry, my microphone decided to be turned off. I got some of that.
Okay, the gist of it was, do you have any recommended plugins for replicating sites within a multi-site and also backing them up?
That's a complicated question because backing up, it depends on what you plan on doing with the backup. If you want a backup of the entire network, I believe you should do that from the server level. For example, if you're using cPanel, cPanel has cPanel backups essentially. And that will take your entire site, all the files, all the images, everything, as well as the entire database. And you can have it back up every day, every other day, cycle through your backups. Personally, that's basically what I do for all of my sites. It's not something I depend on WordPress for, because I believe that asking WordPress to back itself up is probably going to make my site run a little bit slower. Now that said, if I wanted to back up individual sites on a domain, it starts getting weird because Backup Buddy and I think VaultPress might be the only two that can actually do that well and reliably. Restoring a site from a backup, restoring a single site from a backup is also, again, going to be much more complicated than just restoring the entire network. Duplicating a site on the network is a different matter altogether. There are plugins, Blog Cloner, and there are a couple of duplication plugins specifically for multi-site that are awesome for that, but they don't do backups in the same way that you're thinking. Is that what you were kind of looking for?
Almost. I want to replicate the entire network onto like a dev or test or staging environment. And typically, for single sites, I'll use Backup Buddy. It works great. Because Backup Buddy can work for the entire network.
So you can use Backup Buddy for the entire network, and that works pretty good. When I'm doing a duplication to make a dev site, I quite literally just do it like I would for a single site. I copy down all the files locally, I copy down the database locally, and I have WP-CLI loaded on my laptop as well as on my servers, and it has a built-in search and replace command, which is what we call serialization safe. It makes sure that you're only going to be editing data safely. So WordPress multi-site saves your domain name in very odd places, or rather WordPress saves it in odd places. And if you change your domain name, some of your settings for plugins and themes will magically vanish because they were saved with the domain name encapsulated in there. And it knows how long your domain name is. So if you change it from mysite.com to mysupercoolawesomesite.com, the string length is changed, and it knows that, and so it defaults back to the original settings, which is nothing. There's a tool called the Interconnected Database Search and Replace tool. You can find it on GitHub. The guys who wrote it are brilliant. They've also written a couple of WordPress plugins that'll let you examine how bad your how bad your site in general is running. It's kind of a competitor to the P3 profiler that's very popular, but that also does the same thing. Backup Buddy does that really well too. When it does the export and the import, it knows how to handle the changing of domain names. I'm pretty sure that Desktop Server can do that as well, including with the multi-site, and it can push it back up to the multi-site, which has kind of made it become my favorite thing to recommend of choice when you're doing local dev work, for multi-site or not multi-site, because you can just download the site, suck it down, make your changes, edit everything, and then push things back up. And if you're sure that you're not going to overwrite any horrible changes, that works well. But version control in WordPress is always going to be a problem because it saves things in the database and the files, and so you kind of can't have one without the other. And you've got, your theme settings are in WP options, and then your posts are in WP posts, and you want to make sure you update all those things the right way in the right order. But I believe, yes, Backup Buddy can do that. I've heard very good results from it, but I myself am doing full site backups and full site restores basically the old school way, because I want to take the weight off of WordPress when I'm doing them. I don't want to make my site slow when I'm downloading a copy of my database.
Okay. What was the interconnected tool? Do you remember the name of that, Mika?
Sure, it's the Interconnected DB Search and Replace tool.
Okay, thanks. We're going to go to another question. Who else had their hand up? Yeah, Sarah?
Mika, I've never used multi-site, and was just wondering if you could give some examples of situations where it works really well.
So examples of situations in which multi-site is the right choice, where it works well.
Multi-site is an awesome choice when you want to run literally multiple separate sites that probably don't have anything to do with each other, except perhaps a loose collection of users. So my best example is that I have a site for my father, my mother, from whom he's been divorced, by the way, for 30 years, my stepmother, my stepfather, my aunt, my uncle, my wife, and my brother. And that's one multi-site network. They all share the site. They have no idea about it, by the way. They think they each have their own hosting, and they're perfectly happy that way. It keeps them out of trouble because they can't install things without checking with me, and they know that. All their content is separate. All of their images are separate. As far as they're concerned, they have their own sites, and I don't have to worry about going to 16 different places when I want to run an upgrade or WordPress has a new version. I don't have to worry about spot checking all their plugins because I'm controlling all of these things for them. And that's sort of like the closest example that you can grab. The other things that it's really good at, though, is schools. Having a lot of schools have been using multi-site to great effect by having their admins run the network app as the network admin, and then having each individual, I'm blanking on the term for it, but I'm just going to say their group of study. So you've got the literature guys over here, and you've got the math guys over here, and you can have them segregated by their own groups. You do end up having to add things like multi-network plugins sometimes if they want to have sub-sites off of their sites, but by being able to silo them to their own little locations, you've got an ease of update when you're managing things, and they have an ease of knowing that they can just use their own little site and not worry about it. Basically, multi-site starts to be great when you want to be in control of the network. And people don't think of it like that for some reason. They think of it as, I just want multiple sites. Well, no, I want to be in control of this network. I want to be a little network god. I want to be able to micromanage all the things if I have to, or let them go if I have to, and trust that they're not going to blow things up or break things. And that's where we start to run into, we look at multi-site as a good thing. Multi-site is a almost great thing for stores. There is not a store plugin yet that lets you share your content in the right way. So when I have a store, I have an inventory, and I want to be able to share it between location A, location B, and location C. Multi-site really can't do that yet, and it's not a feature of multi-site. It's a feature of the stores not perhaps addressing it in the right way. They treat it as siloed data, so you install, say, WooCommerce, and it says, okay, I've got WooCommerce activated on this site. Great, I'm going to use it on this site. I don't have WooCommerce on this site, not going to use it. But if I do turn it on for the second site, the inventory is separate. So I don't have a way to say, well, you know, my master warehouse has a lot of shoes and this location doesn't have any, so it'll take longer to buy things. And I've pitched the idea to a lot of e-commerce sites and said, you know, this is a place where someone could really make a multi-site store just the most brilliant thing. You could have each location have their own design, each location have their own admins, but you could control the network where you've got all your inventory. And it gets really hard really fast. I mean, I've walked down the tree of how messy that gets. So it's not quite there yet. I know someday somebody will have it. When you're doing things like Boy Scout groups also, that was something I was helping a friend make for his troops. He wanted to have like 6 different ones on a network. And basically when you start grouping people together in logical chunks, multi-site really starts to sing and really starts to go well. And I saw the guy in the blue shirt, and he has a black watch, and he raised his hand.
All right, I just wanted to ask if you had a chance to work with Magento and its multi-store functionality. It's very similar to what WordPress could move to as far as managing data in one central store catalog across multiple sites.
Oh, what was the name of it again? I couldn't quite hear.
It's talking about the multi-store feature in Magento, if you're familiar with that.
Most of my familiarity with Magento comes from banging my head on why it has to have the database in the same location as the server. A lot of web hosts, and this includes Dreamhost, we actually separate your web server and your SQL server. Magento doesn't like that at all. It hates it. So most of my usage of that has been trying to figure out how to make that run a little faster. I've heard about the multiple store setup working very well, but the way that Magento does things in its database aren't directly translatable to how WordPress does things in their database. I imagine you could integrate them. I'm sure someone has, but we just haven't figured out how to yet that I know of, to have multiple sites on a network reaching out to one Magento store and pulling all that in. That'd be a really cool thing to see. I would love it if somebody could invent that. But now I'll have to go bang on the Magento multiple store thing and see exactly how that works.
We had a question from one of our other members. He had to leave, but he had a multi-site which is set up with subdirectories, and it works fine on the front end. The public is able to browse, and all the sites load at their subdirectories properly. But then when the admin logs in and tries to go to the dashboards of any of those sites, then he seems to be hitting like a redirect loop or something that he's just never able to actually get to the dashboards of those sites. What would he look at to kind of start troubleshooting an issue like that?
The redirect loop is possibly one of the more annoying bugs, because unless you happen to have something on your browser, like I have a Chrome add-on called Redirect Path, and anytime a site redirects itself, it tells me I've redirected from this site to this site, and it lets me figure out, oh, okay, it's redirecting from http://domain.com to http://domain.com to back to domain.com, and goes in a cycle, and that lets me know things like, oh, okay, you have a mismatch with your home and your site URL, which is actually the #1 gotcha that hit people with WordPress 4.1. In WordPress 4.0, we started to tighten down the cookie security. We got it much better and much more accurate in WordPress 4.1. So when I mentioned way back earlier, I said that if you have those things out of sync, sometimes your site can have login problems. That's one of the login problems. I would say to him, take a really good look at your browser and where it's sending you to when you go to domain.com/sitename/wp login.php. Is that being redirected anywhere? Sometimes you can see the URL that it comes up with just looks wrong. And when you get stuck in the redirect loop, also make sure that you've deleted all the cookies. I mean, it's stupid, but sometimes your browser is going to hang on to a damn cookie for way longer than we want it to, and it doesn't remember that it's got to delete them, or that, oh, hey, this is a different cookie, I should refresh them. The last thing that I look for when I do that is, can I reproduce it on another browser? And as stupid as that is, sometimes Chrome can be phenomenally moronic when it comes to logging you in. I had to walk my aunt through Internet Explorer the other day because it just decided that it was going to remember this login, and it didn't matter how many times she typed in another one. So I sent her over to Firefox. Everything magically worked. We knew the problem was not the site, but somehow the cookies in the browsers. But that is not an easy thing to debug, and I feel sorry for the guy, and I wish that he'd stayed so I could have maybe taken a look at the site and seen if something popped up on my end.
Yeah, well, thanks for the tips. We'll pass them along. I had a question about doing like site-wide alerts. So this is for a school district where they have each school on their own site within the multi-site, and they would like a way that, for weather alerts or other kind of pressing news, they can just publish once and it appears on all of the sites. Have you come across any good solutions for something like that?
I have, actually, and there are a couple of them. I'm trying to think of what the best one is. I know that there's one called, there was a plugin a few years ago called the WordPress notification bar that the fella said that he was trying to make it work with Multisite, but it was a little bit weird. The easiest thing to do is to remember that you've got, if you've got the right themes, then you have WP head in all of your themes, and you can hook into that. And by utilizing that, you should be able to, a plugin should be able to have a pop-up. But for the most part, what I see when people want that is they want to have a pop-up just on the admin end, which is probably not what you were looking for. And now I'm wondering if I can find that silly plugin that did... I did find it. Awesome. Okay, there's a plugin by a fella named Pippin Williamson. It's called Simple Notices Pro Plugin for WordPress. It costs $8, and it'll let you do an alert of different colors for your network. And I am pretty sure that he set that up so that you could do it for the whole entire network, and that you could have a public one or a private one for logged in users, and you could use it for membership specials and things like that. And I'm pretty sure that he did it for Multisite because he uses it on Multisite, and I can't imagine that he would have written that without that in mind. So see if I can figure out how to do this properly. And that's the Q&A. Let's see. I don't know if anybody can see it in the chat room, but I put up a link for that one in the group chat.
Yeah, yep, we can see that. Thanks. All right, so it's 7:30 here. We've been going about an hour. So I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have more time, or do you want to end here? This is what we had planned on.
My ride gets here in about 10 minutes. So you've got me for about 10.
Okay. Did anyone else have any other questions or anything else to run by Mika? Okay. Well, I guess that's everything we've got for now. So thanks a lot for your time, Mika.
You guys are very welcome, and I'm hoping to make it out to WordCamp Grand Rapids one of these years.
Yeah, yep. We haven't picked the dates yet, but we're aiming for August. So good time of year to come to Michigan.
I don't know. It's pretty humid out there. I used to live in Chicago. But August is so far open. I should be back from WordCamp Europe by July.
All right, Mika, if anyone would like to follow you, connect with you online, what are the best ways to do that?
If you are looking for WordPress support, please go to the WordPress Support forums. I basically live in the Multisite subs forum there, so you'll run into me every couple of days, I'm sure. If you just want to follow me on Twitter, it's @Ipstenu, IPSTENU, but I cannot guarantee that you'll find anything there more entertaining than me ranting about sports television shows, and occasionally why is someone telling me that when they deleted their entire site, the site went away. I'm currently not available for hire as a consultant, which a lot of people ask. I just don't have enough time if I want to remain married, and I'm kind of fond of being married, so I have to politely decline that for now. But I'm around on Twitter. I'm around WordPress Support Slack. It's the new way that we all communicate on that. I've got IRC open pretty much every workday, and I am always hovering around the WordPress support forums, happy to help out anybody.
All right, thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, bye guys. Have a good day.